This year, obviously, we're lucky enough in our industry to have good government oversight and to protect all of us in California. And sarcasm was so thick there, and no one got it. So AB 38, so it's not often that the Natural Hazard Disclosure Company has a fantastic thing to add. So AB 38 has been kind of a nagging disclosure for a lot of folks. So we wanted to bring in.
Hot topic.
I'm gonna use that one. Yeah. Well, stay the what? Stay out of hot topic?
That's what that comment was.
Oh, that was fire. That was fire. So we reached out. We've had a lot of nice interviews online with Chief Hawks from CalFIRE, and we have those available for you. But now we wanted to bring something closer. I reached out a couple weeks ago, or about a month ago, I guess. And John Morgan, who's a 21-year veteran of CalFIRE, came all the way down from his home in Sacramento area to give us some good information, not only about AB 38, whatever other questions you have about CalFIRE, their role, and he's an expert. 21 years, that makes him an expert. So please bring your questions, and we'd love to hear more from you. If you'd like to have this sent to you afterwards, we can do that as well, along with some other nice training videos from Chief Hawks in our group, okay? So without further ado, Chief.
Good morning. This is undoing. All right. So I probably should have been firing up the computer while I was getting introduced, but I'm going to go ahead and do that now. And we'll get going with the presentation, but gosh, what a lively group, right? I mean, I get to be here to do this presentation, talk to you about Defensible Space. It's awesome. I would say something that I tell the firefighters, and as I talk and try to type my password, it's like, walking and chewing gum and drinking coffee, it's impossible. But I tell the firefighters, don't be the one that lets things happen, be the one that makes things happen. So it goes along with your I get to.
Come on, you guys. I get to.
Right?
Yay. This is awkward,
All
We
right.
gotta act like he's not doing that right now.
Yeah. Perfect. Let's see. Do I need that thing?
No.
All right.
Can you use it so that way you can
Absolutely.
get that? Awesome, thank you.
I feel like my rock star days back in high school. So, all right. CalFIRE, AB 38. AB 38, an assembly bill that enacted what we're actually talking about. Civil Code 1102.19. And it's all about ensuring defensible space. What in the world is defensible space? It's that area around a home that provides not only protection for the home. Oh, that's one of my favorites too.
Talk about rock star days.
I was about to break into it. But it also provides an area around a home for firefighters to work in during a fire. So defensible space, it provides more than just home protection. It's people protection too. I will ask you to go ahead and write down that website that's there, www.fire.ca.gov/dspace. On that page, you can actually get to this entire presentation. It's right here. Just kind of scroll down, second blue box, related links, and it's the very first one, additional AB 38 information. I could look at the screen back there, but I don't have vision that good. It's like, all right. So this website right here is where you want to go. This is going to give you all the information about CalFIRE's Defensible Space program. It has links to additional information, and the third blue box down how do I request a defensible space inspection? That's the box you want to get to eventually, but until, get back over here, until then, we will continue to go on through our presentation. This is a good little picture right here. This is a case in which we had the opportunity to take a picture of a home before a fire during our defensible space inspections. And you can see there on the left that there's vegetation, there's brush, things of that nature around this home. We actually cited this homeowner, and they ended up, as you can see in the center picture, clearing better defensible space around that structure. It turned out there was a fire. We didn't mean for there to be one. But because of that clearance, all the way to the right there, you can see that house came through that fire unscathed, and it also provided a really great opportunity for protecting our firefighters during that event as well. Why do we care about defensible space? We touched on it a little bit earlier, but it's that fire front that's coming down to the community.
So sorry.
Hey, that's all right. You get to answer that, or not.
I think we heard the third one.
I think.
Right? I'm going to take your question real quick, but I would say write your questions down because I may answer your question during the presentation. Quickly, go ahead.
I just wanted to know the difference between supplemental and the other one, fire risk, because if you have the one where you have to get the fire department to come out, then that's, more. But the other one, if it's just supplemental, the fire department called back and said, oh, we don't have to come. So what's the difference between the two?
That's a good question because I'm not familiar with the supplemental term that you're using. If it's
a fire risk. It says it's a high fire risk, but it's not in.
Gotcha. We will cover that. It's up next. Fire hazard severity zone is coming. So with that, and this is why I want to answer all your questions, but I might answer your questions through the presentation. So we'll go into questions and answers after this. But anyways, that firewall, that wall of fire, I should say, is coming down toward that community, and what we need is better defensible space around that community in order to save those homes, in order to protect the people who are in there and provide better egress or evacuation routes and that type of thing. So that's why defensible space is so important. Now, AB 38. As mentioned, AB 38 enacted Civil Code 1102.19. So Civil Code 1102.19 is part of your residential disclosures laws, right? This isn't a fire department law, this is a real estate law. So, and I kind of wish the fire department had a little bit more input on the bill, but with that, what it did was it basically requires a seller to disclose, one, certain portions of home hardening aspects. What is this structure made out of? Specific to defensible space, it also requires a seller to get a defensible space inspection and provide that documentation of compliance to the buyer. When? This only applies to homes within a high or very high fire hazard severity zone. So we have multiple severity zones. We have no severity. You'd find that like in the Central Valley, downtown Los Angeles, that type of stuff. Downtown San Diego, although you'd be surprised at how many San Diego homes do reside in there very high. And then moderate. Moderate still has a fire hazard risk, but it's not so great. And then high and very high, as you can imagine. These are those homes that are kind of on the outskirts that have fields and mountains in the backyard, or a street or two over, and that's where we lose a lot of homes during these big fires, especially as Santa Ana's blow, and we start to see how important defensible space is around not just single homes, but entire communities. The law, they did think about, and I think it's because they had input from the real estate industry, they thought, We don't. Dun dun dun. This is why we should go all wireless, all the time. All right, we'll see if it comes. Yes, it came back. So I'll walk this direction. I'm gonna stay away from that side. They thought we don't want this to slow down escrow. So they put in a provision in the law that says, if it looks like you're not gonna make it, if it looks like you're not going to get that certificate or that documentation of compliance, you do have an option. The buyer and seller can enter into a written agreement. Remember, this is a real estate law, so this doesn't have anything to do with the fire department. It's not a waiver, that type of thing. It's another portion of this law. Part of your agreement, your sales agreement. I'm not a realtor or a real estate agent, so I don't know all the right terms, but this is part of that sales agreement. It allows them to enter into that written agreement where the buyer assumes the responsibility of obtaining that documentation of compliance. I feel like I should have like a big funny video here or something. Break it up a little bit, but we get to listen to this whole thing. Civil Code 1102.19 is right here. I provide a link to the actual law. It's not very long. That's it. This is super short, honestly. You print it out, it's only one page. But there's something important I wanted to point out. And the very first thing that's called out is the seller of. Right? So that's the first person who's responsible. In the law, in the very first paragraph, the seller of. Okay? I get that question a lot. Who's responsible to do this? Is it the buyer's responsibility? Is it the agent's responsibility? It's the seller's responsibility. The very first thing called out. And of course, this is in transfer of real property, specifically residential. All right? Back to the presentation. And again, you have access to this exact same presentation by going to that website I mentioned earlier, so you can look through this. You have all the links, you have everything I'm showing you now at your fingertips. Fire hazard severity zones. This is the key. So the state, this entire state, this wonderful California we live in, is almost all fire prone. And since most of the state is fire prone, back in the early 2000s, the legislation decided, hey, CalFIRE, at the time CDF, we need you to designate different fire hazard severity zones throughout the state. So that's something else that's important. We're going to switch back over to that law real quick. Right here. So they needed us to designate fire hazard severity zones. So what this states is that these areas located in a high or very high fire hazard severity zone as identified by the Director of Forestry and Fire Protection. Forestry and Fire Protection is our official name. We are also known as CalFIRE. So why do I bring that up? You're going to get natural hazard disclosure companies. They come to me all the time and they say, hey, your map doesn't match mine. And I say, hey, the law calls out my map. So remember that. It's great that new technology has allowed private vendors to make really great maps, and we are currently upgrading our maps. However, the one map that's called out in this law is our map. With that, as we kind of cruise through this, I'm not going to read every single word to you, but it's basically going over the fact that we are in a fire-prone state, and many areas are subject to fire hazard severity zones. With that inside that picture there, and we'll go to a better one here soon, you can see kind of different colors. Pinks, greens, yellows, orange. There's a tiny bit of red in there. You can't really see it on this screen. So when you go to look up your property, you're going to find your property inside one of those zones. And if it's within a red or a pink or an orange, those are the very high and high fire hazard severity zones. And I provide a link for you right here. So this is what the fire hazard severity zone viewer looks like. And on the left-hand side, you can see some binoculars. I like the internet speed in here, by the way. It's working. When you click on the binoculars, on the right-hand side of the screen, it shows you a place where you can enter an address. I have a bunch of them that are already in here, so I'll use one. It'll zoom down and put a red dot right where your house is. The subject property will say. This one happens to be in one of those high or very high fire hazard severity zones. You can tell because it's not yellow or green. Green would indicate federal forest lands. This does not apply in those areas either. So this is kind of what you'll be looking at. There are some areas that have no color. This is in a city, as I mentioned, that's kind of outside of, number one, CalFIRE's jurisdiction, but also it's down there away from the mountains. It's away from that wildland area where this applies to. All right. The law also talks about different ordinances and what applies to your to these different areas. So the difference is CalFIRE has control or responsibility over the state areas. It's called State Responsibility Area, or SRA. And then your local governments, your cities and fire districts and that type of thing, they are called a Local Responsibility Area, or an LRA. And the reason I bring it up is because in the SRA, your home, the subject property, is inspected to state regulation, which is Public Resource Code 4291. Public Resource Code 4291 is set in law. It's not a suggestion. And it states that anyone who lives in one of these fire-prone areas must create defensible space. It's kind of like the speed limit. We know it's out there, right? It's 65 on this highway, it's 55 there, 35 over here. And just because there aren't enough law enforcement officers to catch us every time we break the speed limit, not that I ever do in the state car, but it doesn't mean that we're not breaking that law. So just because we don't have enough inspectors, fire departments don't have enough personnel to inspect or to cite everyone who doesn't create defensible space, it doesn't mean they're not breaking the law. It's still required, just like the speed limit. So 4291 is a state minimum standard, and local jurisdictions can enact ordinances that go above and beyond. So that's kind of the statement down here. It talks about how local factors could influence a local government to create an ordinance that goes beyond 4291. So let's talk about Santa Ana winds. On the east side of a property, this local government might, and I'm not saying they do, but they might require more than 100 feet of defensible space. Because when we get an east wind coming from Santa Ana, that's where that big fire front is going to come from. We may need more than 100 feet. That being said, typically the inspection only goes to the property line, so on those smaller lots, it doesn't really matter. But on those larger properties that you're dealing with, 5 acres, 10 acres, more, that could be a factor. So looking up those local ordinances could be important. And how do you do that? check with your local fire department. And I also have a link here to many of the local jurisdictions throughout California. So it's not 100%, this isn't my website, it's the Muni Code website, and they probably have about 90% of the jurisdictions throughout California. You can look up their ordinances, their specific codes, looking up things like weed abatement, or defensible space, or vegetation management, and that'll pop up these local jurisdictions ordinances. The reason that's important is, number one, it could affect who inspects the property. It could also affect what it's being inspected to, what standard it's being inspected to, which could create work for the seller. Somebody in one of these types of meetings also said, well, that just seems like a negotiation point for me. So there's that. The self-assessment. We have a self-assessment on that website up there. Just down a little bit. Your clients, if they're worried about not being able to pass this inspection, could take this self-assessment. It asks a lot of questions about how is your property set up to be defended or defend itself in a wildfire event. And it'll go through all those questions. They answer everything as honestly as possible. There's no enforcement officer coming after this and saying, hey, you said you don't have good defense. No, we don't monitor that. And at the end of it, when you hit submit, it gives you a report that says, hey, we recommend these steps to fix up your place, to make it better suited to defend itself during a wildfire event. Yeah, this is the site. Go to it. Self-assessment. We talked about who conducts the inspection, but to reiterate, in that state responsibility area, it's going to be CalFIRE. That's the only entity that is authorized. And the reason I bring it up, down here in Southern California, we found 3 or 4 companies who decided, I'm gonna jump on this bandwagon. I bet I could charge $400 or $500 for one of these inspections. Be careful. First off, they're not authorized to conduct an inspection in state responsibility areas. Only CalFIRE, period. CalFIRE doesn't charge. Why? Because you already paid. We're we're tax-based. You pay us every year and you grow, oh my God. But we're gonna do this inspection for free, so don't worry.
Thank you.
Oh my God.
Something free.
That's the nice thing about CalFIRE's inspection. There are local jurisdictions that do have fee schedules, that do charge for their inspections. That's where checking those local ordinances and checking that is going to be very important. So call that city, the city clerk or the county clerk. Call that city office or the county office and say, hey, is there a local ordinance? What is the inspection request process? If it's in state responsibility area, it's super easy. You're just gonna go to our website, click, I wanna order an inspection, and you're done. And you also have a link right there. When, this is a big question, when do I order this thing? How long does it take? I say order early. Always order early. Our employees are affected by the same thing your employees might be affected by. Sick time, vacation, bereavement, fire activity. If we have a big fire going on, they're out there doing that. These inspectors are also firefighters. So understand that there are things that could delay this process. So order early. As soon as you know someone is going to list, tell them, get on the website, here it is, order your inspection. Get it going. Because it could take longer than a week. It could take up to a month, I've seen, just depending on activity going on. So that could have a huge impact on what you're trying to do, right? A short escrow, you're thinking, oh, this is 15 days, 20 days, nice, cash deal, boom. What, I need an inspection? But what if we tell you, hey, we're so busy we can't get out there in 30 days. What's our option? Remember, the law told us that you have the option, the buyer and seller can enter into a written agreement as part of that sales agreement to allow that buyer to accept that responsibility of obtaining the documentation of compliance. That's a big old sentence. It says here within 1 year. So remember, I'm hearing CalFIRE's, for CalFIRE's perspective, right? In our areas, there aren't ordinances that preclude you from taking up to a year as a buyer for getting this. But it does also state, if you're in a local jurisdiction that has an ordinance, that you have to follow that ordinance's timelines. Okay? All right. Neighboring properties. CalFIRE's super easy about this. We're like, we stop at the property line and that's it. So your neighbors don't affect you in the state responsibility area. There are very few local jurisdictions who do have neighboring property laws associated with this. So, I don't know of any here in Southern California. They're typically up in the north, but that's another thing to check for your local agencies. If you do find out there's a local ordinance, ask them about neighboring properties and how it might affect. Typically, it doesn't for your subject property, but for sure, in the state responsibility area, we stop at the property line. All right, now it's question and answer time. Hit me with what I didn't cover. I got one in the
I
back.
have a question. So who's gonna monitor and make sure that the buyer does it within a year?
That's a real estate transaction question. It's part of that sales agreement, right? So, and I often wonder the same thing. Is escrow really closed? Right? There's something that's, I don't know. It's part of the sales agreement.
And what's gonna happen if they don't? Are there fines? What are the fines?
I guess the sky's the limit. I'm no lawyer and I'm no realtor, but I could say if someone did not fulfill their purchase agreement and I'm the seller, could I come back and say, hey, the sale is void? I don't know. I have no idea.
It's the buyer responsibility. He decides at that point to accept
There
it.
you go ahead.
So once you get the inspection completed, so I know this crazy market things go fast, but let's say it takes 6 months to sell a house and you do the inspection and the beginning and everything's done. And then 6 months later you're into escrow. Do I need to get a new inspection? How long does that last?
Oh, we got another microphone coming.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the question is, how long is an inspection good for? Per this law, Civil Code 1102.19, it's 6 months. So you could use an inspection that was done at up to 6 months prior to the, what it says is to the date you enter a sales agreement.
6 months prior to the date you enter the sales agreement. So
Right.
place if it's a
So then you might have escrow in addition. Again, I'm not a lawyer. I would ask that question to your legal counsel. However, that's what it states. Had a question over here.
So when you encourage everybody, if they're in one of these very high fire severity zones, to go to your site first and schedule a inspection. What if you don't have jurisdiction? What happens next? Will you contact that person who made that request?
Absolutely. Great question. Just, here's what I say. Go here. Just go here. That's it. As soon as you click on this link right here, use our Defensible Space inspection request form. It's going to ask you a few questions. What's your name? And it's asking for the owner, right? Because We are a government entity, and again, not a lawyer or a real estate agent or realtor, but I'm told that no one except for the seller can ask a government entity to come to the property, okay? So when the seller enters their information, it's gonna ask them for their name, their phone number, their email address, and what address do you need the inspection conducted? That's it. Hit submit, boom. It's like 45 seconds and you're done. When that happens, our computer is going to go through and it's going to say, hey, you are or you are not in one of these high or very high fire hazard severity zones. So it either applies or it doesn't. And it's going to send you an email that states that. Automatically, it's just going to shoot it straight to it. And so you'll get a quick rundown of, okay, it's either required or not. It's also going to look at whose jurisdiction are you in. And when it does that, it'll forward your information. Let's say you're in a very high fire hazard severity zone in San Diego. It's going to send that information straight to San Diego. And they're going to get it in their Defensible Space email address. They're going to see that request and process.
So we always want to go to you first because, like you said, you're free, and if you are the responsible party, we won't have to pay, but the San Diego may charge, is what you're saying too, correct?
Now, yeah, I don't work for San Diego City. However, I have heard that their ordinance does have a fee schedule attached to it. You'll notice here also that we have a few other jurisdictions that are actually listed right here. You can go straight to them. So we have Los Angeles County, Orange County, Santa Barbara, and Ventura counties all listed here. You can go straight to their website and bypass ours. But if you go through ours, it's just going to push the information to them anyways. Either way, but you can go straight to them there. Interestingly, people see Santa Barbara and think it says San Bernardino, but it doesn't. So yeah, what else? We have another question
One
here.
more question.
Okay, last question. I'm just a little, I don't know, confused. So this is state law for the state ordinance of the defensible space, correct? And we go here. How do we know if there's a local ordinance and we have to, and do we have to get an inspector? Is that necessary? It's not.
Right? So let's say you're trying to sell a home in the city of Riverside. It's within the city boundary of Riverside. I can tell you right now that there is very high fire hazard severity zone within the city boundary of Riverside. When you do that, you request that inspection through our site, it's going to tell you this home is in a very high fire hazard severity zone, and we have forwarded your information to that local jurisdiction. It also lists their phone number, so the requester is going to be able to actually call that fire department and say, hey, I just put in a defensible space request. It said I am in a very high fire hazard severity zone, and it gave me your phone number, and they can provide additional information.
That's exactly right. It did the same thing. You plug it in. It said I was in a high. I had to ask for an inspector. He came the same day, walked in, did his thing. You're good.
It was like 10 minutes too. I mean, the inspector guy around here is amazing. He's super fast. Like he's.
Christopher Knowles.
Yes.
All
I have him saved now.
Yeah, exactly. Keep his numbers. So,
So you want to keep Mike, I can tell.
I'm here all day. No, seriously, I'll answer questions for 4 hours. I don't care.
Perfect.
So if the meeting's over, that's fine. You can do
got
your
5
closing
minutes.
things.
I have one quick question. When you get the actual certificate, like the certificate that's filed, I think I'm loud, I don't know if you heard that. Okay, I guess I do. When you get the certificate of like that you passed or clearance, where does that get filed?
It gets filed in my database.
Okay, so if somebody loses it, they can call and like give an address, or how do they get another copy of it?
Absolutely. You know what I would suggest? Go to my website, request another inspection, and the computer is going to see that that inspection has already been completed. And that night, when the databases sync up and do their magic, it emails a copy of that straight to the requester.